Hello, everyone. My name is Drew Donahue. I am a multi-county riparian technician, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP for short. In a nutshell, CREP is a voluntary program for agricultural landowners that provides financial and technical assistance to restore riparian areas. It is a program that is under the Farm Service Agency, which is under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. CREP was introduced in the 1996 Farm Bill, and in Oregon, it was introduced in the 1998 Farm Bill, and was the fifth in the nation to do so. Originally, Oregon CREP only enrolled salmon-bearing streams, but today it has opened up to a lot more landowners. On the right there is an image of all the cumulative acres enrolled in CREP in 2019 in Oregon. So a little about me. So why am I talking to you about CREP today? Even though my title is riparian technician, most people just call me the Crep tech because I solely work with Crep clients. I'm shared between 3 counties, Clackamas, Marion, and Yamhill, which means I work with a lot of different people. I work with 3 Farm Service agencies, 3 Natural Resource Conservation Service agencies, around 3 Soil and Water Conservation districts, around 5 stewardship foresters from Oregon Department of Forestry, dozens of watershed councils, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, Oregon Department of Agriculture, and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. There are currently 92 CREP clients across the 3 counties as of 2020, and dozens of interested clients in the process of enrolling. So before we get into a little bit about CREP, I just want to talk about riparian areas. So riparian area is the interface between water and land. Or another way of saying that is riparian areas are where water saturates the soil more than adjacent areas and where water-loving vegetation is concentrated. So on the bottom left, there is a graph of what our riparian areas look like. We mostly look at the bank zone, the overbank zone, the transitional zone, and the upland zone. So basically, it's the vegetation adjacent to your waterways. But not all riparian areas look like that. Sometimes all your zones can be scrunched up just like in this image, and they're all different and unique. But the reason riparian areas are important is because of the multiple functions that it provides. So one of those functions is shade. So this is a really great quote from U.S. Forest Service. Riparian buffers of 100 feet or more have been reported to provide as much shade as an undisturbed late successional and old growth forest. So this is really important because of aquatic organisms. So they require cooler waters to survive. So one example I have is the Willamette River. It gets between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit between June and August. And if we look at this graph from Salmon Watch, that is in this area, which is the lethal to adults and lethal to smolts category. It's also where diseases and bacteria can thrive. So riparian areas are really important to provide shade for aquatic organisms. Another function is erosion control. So native riparian vegetation can reduce stream bank erosion and sometimes even trap the soil and start rebuilding the bank back. So our native willows is really good at that. Root penetration and organic matter can reduce compaction and restore soil structure. And then I have an example here of some root depths. So a lot of the times our riparian areas are invaded with invasive species. So one example is Himalayan blackberry, and that has the average root depth of around 1.6 feet. We also have English ivy, which has a root depth of about 1 to 4 inches. So these are really shallow in comparison to our native plants. One example I have there is our native cottonwoods. They can have roots as deep as 16 feet. So this picture here is from a study that found a cut bank, and so those are cottonwood roots, and that's the kind of protection you want in your riparian area. So another function is filtration. So riparian vegetation can reduce runoff, trap and absorb pesticides. They can reduce sediment, pathogens, chemicals, manure, biosolids, and compost from entering the waterways. Vegetation can also reduce erosive wind velocities and provide a stable area. And of course, vegetation removes CO2 from the air and stores it in the form of carbon. Wildlife habitat is also provided from riparian areas. So riparian buffers provide the 3 essentials for habitat: food, water, and cover. They also increase litter fall, large woody debris, overhanging vegetation, and fine woody debris, which are critical for our local aquatic organisms. So on the bottom left, there is an image of a caddisfly, and that is a macroinvertebrate. And if you're not familiar with macroinvertebrates, they're basically aquatic insects. And these are really important because this is what our native fish like salmon eat. We also have lampreys in our creeks and rivers. So that image from the bottom right is from the Oregon Zoo. Lampreys appeared in the fossil record 450 million years ago, and our first trees only appeared 350 million years ago. So a really cool historic fish that's older than trees that also rely on macroinvertebrates and riparian areas. So here's another good quote from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. In general, the area within 600 feet of a stream is used most heavily by wildlife. In Western Oregon, of 414 known species of wildlife, 359 use riparian ecosystems extensively, and 29 are tied exclusively to the area. And more, I could go on for hours about how great riparian areas are and all the functions they provide. So flood mitigation, pollinator habitat, noise buffer, even our wider riparian areas tend to act as a fire break. So a lot of really great functions that riparian areas provide. All right, so locally, this is an agricultural program. So we're going to be looking more in this area across the 3 counties. So where our hay and pasture and our cropland is. So if we look at that same area on this map, this is the crucial habitat assessment done by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And this is where a lot of our wetland and critical wetland and riparian areas are. So really important to be looking in this area. And then again, this is also where some of our essential salmon habitat is as well. All right, so how do you qualify for Crep? So on your property, you must have a stream having perennial flow or seasonal flow, as long as it has a defined channel and flows at least one day out of the year. You can either have a pond or lake as long as it flows off property. So it has to be attached to some kind of river or creek system. You can have a wetland or a sinkhole or karst, which we don't have as many of those in this area of Oregon. So this does not include things like springs, even if it is a perennial spring and has water in it year round. It doesn't include gullies, ditches, seeps, marshes, and swamps, and things like that. So as long as you have one of the things listed above, you would qualify. And then your riparian area must also be considered non-functional. So all of those functions I listed earlier from riparian areas, one of them has to be impaired. And so that image on the bottom left there, that's one of the stewardship foresters, and actually the creek is actually right behind him. So a lot of this riparian area is impaired, so we're not getting our bank protection with the blackberries not holding in the soil very well. We're not really getting our habitat because it's a monoculture of blackberry. We're not getting our shade either. And then I like this image on the top right because we do have some native trees in this riparian area. So we're getting a little bit of that shade, that erosion control. But as you can see, there's ivy starting to climb up the trees and killing them. So it is still considered non-functional because it is impaired. And then also to qualify, you must be considered, your land must be either cropland or marginalized pasture. And so if you're cropland, so that means your land has to be planted or considered planted to an agricultural commodity during 4 of the 6 crop years from 2012 to 2017. And this is from the most current Farm Bill and can change when the Farm Bill is updated. And then for marginalized pasture, the land has to have been grazed at some point. And so this is a little more flexible in that say you're not currently grazing, that's okay as long as your property was grazed in the past, then you would still qualify. So even if the previous landowner grazed and you didn't, you would still qualify. And then your adjusted gross income cannot be more than an average of $900,000 over the last 3 taxable years, and you have to have owned the property for at least a year. There is one exception to that listed below there. All right, so some Crep incentives. So Crep is a cost share reimbursement program. And so what that means is every practice that you implement, you, the client, would be paying for that practice up front. And then you would submit your receipts to Farm Service Agency and they would reimburse you 75% of that practice up to a certain amount. And so Oregon is unique in that Farm Service Agency pitches in 50%, and then Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board pitches in another 25% to give you that 75% cost share. So some cost shareable practices include site preparation, so mowing and spraying of your invasive plants, your native trees and shrubs and the labor to plant them, protection tubes to protect against deer browse, mulch, plant aftercare, so some mowing and spraying after you planted, Grass and forb seeding. So this is optional, but some people opt in to do this because after you remove blackberry, you have a lot of exposed bare soil. So this could kind of prevent a little bit of erosion. Crep also cost shares fences and watering facilities. So keep in mind that as part of Crep, livestock cannot have access to the Crep area. So whatever you designate your Crep boundary on your property, livestock cannot have access to that. So we're keeping them out of the riparian areas. And so Crep will give you cost share reimbursement to put in a fence and watering facility. And for watering facilities, you will get a plan from one of the NRCS engineers. It also cost shares thinning. So say you have an old Christmas tree stand, ornamental stand, they'll help pay to thin that out, and then a livestock crossing if you need that. So another incentive is a rental rate. So this is going to be based on whether you're categorized as crop, irrigated crop, or marginalized pasture, and how many acres you enroll into Crep. And so basically every year you're going to get a check in the mail from Farm Service Agency, and that is your rental rate. And then some bonus payments. So you'll get a signing incentive payment when you first sign your contract, when you first start, and then you'll get a practice incentive payment after you install your practices. All right, so then some tax deferrals. So I do want to emphasize that neither myself nor Farm Service Agency has control or has the information about tax deferrals, but most of the time, the county works really well with Crep. So most of the time you're going to be in farm tax deferral, and then once you plant your riparian area, that section will go to forest deferral. But again, you're always going to want to check with the county to clarify. Just give them a call, mention the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and they'll give you more information about that. But most of the time they work pretty well with it. And then free technical assistance. So that's my job. So if you know nothing about riparian areas, nothing about planting or how to restore, that is completely okay. That is what I am here for. I'll be writing you up planting plans and specifications. So I'll give you everything you need to know in order to restore your riparian area. But restoration can be hard. So I definitely do not want to sugarcoat it. For those watching, if you're familiar with federal programs, you know that means it's a lot of paperwork. Some weeds can persist for decades, even with proper treatment. So one example of that is Scotch broom. The seeds of that weed can last in the soil for up to 100 years. And then certain soil conditions can lead to major plant die-off, leading to unfunded replanting. So I have an example here on the right. This is of a Crep project that had a major plant die-off. The soil conditions just were not suitable. He replanted multiple times and nothing survived except for those little couple Douglas firs there on the left. I'll talk a little bit more about what happens when this happens, so don't be too worried about that, but just remember that some plants just cannot survive in certain soil conditions. And then the rental rate may not cover the original income you were making. But we are currently measuring success through Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, so we're using the Stream Visual Assessment Protocol, which is there on the right, and we're mainly looking at these 13 categories. So we're giving each of these categories a score to give an overall score for the riparian area. And we're seeing how it is when you started versus how it is when you finish your contract. So overall, Crep is successful. So I looked at 10 Crep clients between 2020 and 2021 where their contracts had expired, and compared their original Stream Visual Assessment Protocol score to the new one that I had scored them. And 9 out of 10 showed an improved in score. So overall, Crep has been very successful. And I will say the only one that didn't show an improvement in score was simply because of some major bank failure. Basically, their trees just couldn't grow fast enough to keep in the bank. So kind of out of their control. We even have a really successful one here in Marion, a jump in 3.15 in their score, which is pretty significant. So there's a picture there on the bottom right. All right, so say you're interested in Crep, you qualify. These are kind of the next steps you can expect. So you want to schedule a site visit with the technician, so myself, and I will determine if your property is eligible, and we can talk more about the program. After that, we're going to want to determine the boundaries of your program. So it is required that you register up to a minimum of 35 feet in Crep. So this is measured from the bank's edge, but you can go up to a maximum of 180 feet. So I actually have an example here on the right. So sometimes this can look a little different. So this farmer has a vegetable field to the north. And basically, he didn't want to modify this vegetable field, which is completely okay. But unfortunately, the bank gets really close to the vegetable field. So I actually had to cut the buffer into chunks. So if you had a similar situation, say you had a pump or some kind of structure, or you just simply wanted to leave a section to be recreational or for some other purpose, we can actually cut up your buffer like that. But he wanted to enroll as much as possible. So basically I put the buffer wherever I could put 35 feet in. And then once we got towards the middle, he's going to plant that lower field. So we also kept it at 35 feet. And then when you get more to the south, this is actually a really like wet area, and he didn't really find it feasible to farm it. So we actually increased the buffer up to 100 feet. He also has a seasonal creek down below, and so we also did a buffer off that. He also has a wetland. He didn't want to register that in the program, but said you had a similar situation, you could also do the wetland on top of the riparian buffer. And then you would decide on your contract length. So Crep is a contract program, and I want to emphasize that is different from an easement. So an easement is more permanent, whereas a contract has a certain length to it. And so the minimum contract length you can sign up for is 10 years, but you can go up to 15 years, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And then after that, we would start your paperwork. So things to keep in mind about your contract: the project area cannot be hayed, grazed, or commercially harvested for the life of the contract. You must keep 200 stems an acre and keep noxious weeds under control for the life of the contract. So when we originally plant your Crep project, we usually go for around 400 to 450 stems an acre, so your native trees and shrubs per acre. So that's double. So we are accounting for die-off. And then again, I don't want that to be scary for noxious weeds. We do understand that you're never fully going to get rid of some of the weeds. They persist for a long time. But as long as you are actively managing them and keeping them under control so they're not impeding the growth of your native trees and shrubs, then you'll be good to go. And then if you drop out of the program without reasonable cause, then you are liable to pay back all money received from Crep. So that's basically the worst thing that can happen. And so that example that I mentioned earlier, that was definitely a reasonable cause. He did everything according to his specifications. He replanted several times. It was out of his control. That major plant die-off was out of his control. So he was able to drop out of the program, and he did not have to pay back the money he received from the program. That image actually there on the right is after the ice storm. So we were assessing a Crep project to see its ice storm damage. Luckily, they ended up being fine, but say you had something similar happen, natural disasters are definitely reasonable cause. So you don't need to worry about that. All right, post-signing. So you signed your contract with Farm Service Agency. This is what you can expect afterwards. You can expect site visits from myself, the technician, after each practice is complete. So what that means is, say your first practice you have in your contract is mowing. So say you did your mowing, you're going to give me a call and say, hey, can you come check it? I'm going to come out to your property. I'm going to sign off saying that you mowed it. And then you're going to submit that form and your receipts to Farm Service Agency to be reimbursed. And you'll do that for every practice. So I'll need to come out and check each practice. And then after you've installed your buffer, you can expect a yearly status review from myself. And so basically, again, I don't want that to be scary. So during these site visits, I'm basically going to check out your buffer. Say that you are not in compliance. So say you have like under 200 stems in a certain acre, or you have some weeds that are a little out of control. That's okay. Basically on your status review, I'm going to write the details of that. I'm going to say like, hey, can you please plant this amount of species in this acre? Or hey, can you please keep this weed under control? And we give you time to do that. So don't worry too much about that. And then I'm going to keep doing those yearly status reviews until you reach free to grow status. And so basically that means once your trees and shrubs are big enough to take care of themselves, I will probably no longer do status reviews unless it is requested from Farm Service Agency. And then you can re-enroll after your contract has expired if you desire. So the great thing about this is that you've already installed your buffer. So you've already put in the work through your initial enrollment. And say your 10 or 15 years is up and your contract expires. You can basically re-enroll in the Crep program for another 10 to 15 years. And you can keep receiving that rental payment for another 10 to 15 years. And it's great because you don't have to do any more work because you've already installed your buffer. All right, so I cannot talk about restoration without talking about the crazy amount of challenges we've been facing in the last couple years. So the pandemic has caused a great amount of paperwork, a backlog in paperwork, so slower processing times. We've also experienced some devastating wildfires. That image there on the top left is actually of a wildfire. It just completely destroyed a fully functional riparian area, and so now they are enrolling in Crep because it is no longer functional, and so that's going to have to be handled a little differently. We had ice storm damage. That picture there on the right is of a Crep project that experienced ice storm damage. We had the drought and heat waves, so that big heat dome. We're starting to see the effects of that now. So some really crispy trees, and we're seeing some die off. So accounting for that. Financial incentives, land is a lot more expensive, so maybe converting land is just not feasible for you. And then looming pests. So one example of that is the emerald ash borer. So this is a pest that is in the eastern United States. It is currently wiping out all ash trees there. And it is pretty much predicted that it eventually will come to Oregon. And if it does come to Oregon, it will most likely wipe out all of our Oregon ash trees, which is our native ash tree. So if this happens, this will increase solar loading by 5 to 10%. So a lot more direct sunlight to our creeks and rivers. But I hope this doesn't scare you away. In fact, I hope this is more incentives to start thinking about your riparian area and how you can restore it, because like I talked about earlier, riparian areas have a lot of great functions and are really important habitat. And have your neighbors join. So again, Oregon is unique in that it has an accumulative impact incentive payment. And so if 2.5 miles of a 5-mile stream segment is enrolled in Crep, all those landowners along that 2.5 mile stretch will receive a bonus payment. So this is a one-time payment. It's about 4 times the rental rate per acre. So it is a significant amount. This is an example of the right here that 4 landowners are received that additional payment because of the amount of land they enrolled in the Crep program. All right, so we're coming towards the end here. I just want to give a Crep showcase of 2 landowners that have been doing an excellent job. They've been really great stewards of their land. So earlier I showed that stream visual assessment that I did that received a 3.15 increase, and that was this project. So their SFAP score went from severely degraded to the fair good category, which is a huge leap. So they sent me some really cool pictures. So this is when they first started in 2007 and 2008. They did it in 3 phases. So Judy said the property had been logged off in the late 1970s and it was never replanted. So blackberry invaded the area. The property was cleared, they slash burned the piles, and the bare soil was overseeded with native grasses. So they did opt in to do that native grass seeding. Here's in 2009, that shows their initial plantings. They did the protection tubes to prevent against deer browse, and then they said they sprayed out the grasses around them after it had been planted. And then here we are in 2021. So huge difference. It was an extremely successful project. Judy said that they're starting to see small fish in the creek, which once had salmon. So they're really excited to see what the future holds. And I did do a site visit with Scott and one of the foresters from ODF. And we also saw fish in the creek. And he said that was the first time he'd seen fish in the creek in years. So they're really, really excited and pleased to see all this wildlife returning to their riparian area. And then here again, here's like more side-by-side comparison of that project. So huge difference. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. If you're interested in Crep, feel free to send me an email or give me a call. But even if you're not interested in Crep, I can provide technical assistance or advice or point you in the right direction. So feel free to contact me. Here's all the relevant contact information for your counties. So I have your Farm Service Agency representative there. So if you have more specific questions about your contract with them or the finances of Crep, go ahead and give them a call. I also listed the county's information. So again, myself nor Farm Service Agency has control or information about tax deferrals. So if you want to double check with the county that Crep would work well for your property, go ahead and give them a call. And then I also listed your local soil and water conservation district. So if you have any other questions about conservation on your property, go ahead and give them a call and they will send someone out to do a site visit on your property. Again, thanks so much for listening and I hope to talk to you soon.